Hi everyone, welcome to javatechie. If you are working with Spring framework, then you have probably used transaction management at some point of your project, right? But have you ever tried to debug and see how it actually works behind the scene? If not, no worries. I'm here to help you out. So in this tutorial, we'll understand step by step how Spring transaction management work internally. First, we'll look at the overall flow and then we'll go one step further and debug the source code to see how everything happens under the hood. Okay, alright. So without any further delay, let's get started. So if you are not familiar with what is transaction or how to use it, then I would highly recommend you to checking out my recent video on transactions. Here I explained everything in details. What is transaction, different level of propagation and isolation with real time example. Okay. I am suggesting this because understanding how something work is easier when you already know what it is, isn't it? So don't worry, I'll share the link in video description so you can check them out. Now let me give you a quick overview of transactions and then we'll see its internal. Okay. Now let's say you have a transfer method that takes the sender and receiver account information. This method does two database operations. It deducts the amount from the sender account and update the database. Then it adds the same amount to the receiver account and update their balance. All good so far. This is happy scenario path, right? But what if something goes wrong during the transfer? Imagine the amount is successfully deducted from the sender account and updated in the database, but due to a failure on the receiver end, it never gets credited. This seems like a data inconsistency and money is lost in transit, isn't it? Now think about the sender. He can't just come to me and ask for his money back, right? Instead, he will cry in corner or probably call customer support again and again to explain what went wrong. That's happened because the data is not consistent in system. So how do we fix these kind of challenges? That's where transaction management comes in. It makes sure that either all database changes are committed or if something goes wrong, then roll back everything. That's out of the box, isn't it? Now our discussion starts from here. How does Spring transaction actually do this behind the scene? He committed everything if all good, he roll back everything if there is something wrong, right? How Spring identify that and how he does these things behind the scene. That is what something we'll do the postmortem now. We'll debug the code and we'll understand how the things work under the hood. How Spring transaction play the game to identify what needs to be committed or what needs to be rolled back. So let's go to our IntelliJ idea. I have created this particular method, transfer method. We'll play with the same transfer scenario. Okay. So this is the transfer method. And if you see the code, it's very simple. We are getting the sender account from the database. We are getting the receiver account from the database. Then we deduct the balance from sender account and we update the database. Then we add the same amount to the receiver account and we update the database. And forcefully to simulate the failure scenario, I am throwing some exception. Okay. So don't go with the code. It's just a simple piece of code to demonstrate transactional internal work. Okay. Fine. So the actual game start when you will define at the rate transactional. Now when you define at the rate transactional, what all thing it does, that is what something we want to know. Now let me simplify this. Let me minimize the method. Now when you annotate at the rate transactional, first Spring transaction internally use the AOP. AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming Language. I believe you are aware about it. Let me give you high level overview about AOP. So if you have any secondary logic which you want to execute before your method execution, or after your method execution, or if there is any failure you want to execute that secondary logic, you can go for aspect oriented programming language. It offers couple of advices, you can use them. Okay, so here Spring transaction internally use around advice. When I'm saying around advice, if any pre-processing logic you want to execute before this method, or you want to execute any post-processing logic after this method, you can go for around advice. Okay, so let me note down here. It will execute before your method execution and after your method execution. Okay, now what logic you want to execute before your method execution? So what logic Spring transaction will apply before execute this transfer method? So before method execution, it will create or get the transaction. Once it get the transaction, within that transaction context, it will execute your transfer method. Then if everything okay or all good, there is no failure, then it will execute. After method execution, it will simply commit the transaction, and if there is any failure after your method execution, what it will does, it will simply roll back that transaction. This is what something Spring transaction does internally. Okay, so it apply the around advice on top of your transfer method. It will execute before logic, which is nothing create or get the transaction. Then it will call your transfer method. Once transfer method executes successfully, on success it will commit the transaction, on failure it will roll back the transaction. Okay, this is what the simple algorithm Spring transaction internally apply to maintain the consistency on your system. This is what something I give you the rough high level overview about how this transaction work. Okay, don't worry, we'll debug the code and we'll see the fact whether this is correct or this is just a random theory. Now you might have a question, do we need to write that advice around advice, or do I need to configure anything to tell to the Spring transaction, hey, use around advice, or this around advice will apply on this particular target method, this transfer method? Let me clear you that by giving a high level overview about different type of library or classes or mechanism involved to initiate this around advice and do the commit and rollback when there is a failure. Now if you observe, this is our account service transfer method. When you will access that, then what it does, it simply create a proxy class. When I'm saying proxy class, can you see the syntax here? Account service, then some number, then cg and once it will create the proxy class, it will extend from your account service and will override the transfer method. But it depends which proxy class it is creating. If your account service class will implement from any interface, then it will create JDK dynamic proxy class. Otherwise, if it is a concrete class, there is no implementation or no parent class for that class, then it will create a cglib based proxy class. Okay, once it create the proxy class, it will override your transfer method, and from the transfer method, it will give complete control to transaction interceptor class. Okay, transaction interceptor is the class who apply the around advice on your transfer method. Can you see the syntax here? You have the transfer method, you override in a cglib class. I mean, you are not doing it, Spring will do internally. He will override the transfer method, then he will give complete target method metadata to transaction interceptor dot invoke method. And if you see the high level syntax of transaction interceptor, if you see this syntax method.invoke, this is nothing your target method, which is nothing transfer method. Before it execute the transfer method, it does create the transaction or get the transaction. That is something before method execution. Then it will execute your target method. After that, if everything is success, then it call after method execution On success, on failure, it will do the rollback. Can you see this signature? Isn't it around advice? Method.invoke, this is the target method. Before that, it execute get transaction. After that, it execute either commit or rollback based on the success or failure. Okay, this is what something Spring internally does. Now, how this proxy class is created, how the method metadata of transfer is getting delegated to the transaction interceptor. Let me create a pseudo code for it, then we'll go for the debugging. Okay, now this is the account service. What Spring internally does, let me create a new class. Spring will internally create a proxy class. Let me create that. It's not the actual implementation what I'm writing. It is just a pseudo code to give you the context of how the proxy work behind the scene. Okay, account service, I will name it proxy. Let it be, or you can define some number dollar then cglib. That is fine. Create the proxy class, then it will extend from your target class, which is nothing account service, right? Then what it will does, it will inject transaction interceptor. Can you see here, there is a class called transaction interceptor from org.springframework.transaction.interceptor. So once it has the transaction interceptor reference, it will just override your transfer method. Now before execute your transfer method, what it will does, it will do the get transaction. This is where it will apply the around advice, right? So what it does, get transaction. Then what it will does on your method execution, if it is success, it will commit or rollback. Okay, so it will does two things based on your success or failure. Fine. This is what something around advice. There is nothing to under, right? This is your target method. Before execute your target method, this logic will execute. After execute your target method, this logic will execute. That is what something called around advice. Fine. Now, then what is the role of this transaction interceptor? If in proxy class everything will be applied, then what is the need of transaction interceptor, right? So what happened? This is not the code will execute directly on your proxy. Rather, we'll give our method metadata to transaction interceptor dot invoke method and give the method metadata. Okay, I'm just typing here. We'll write the code how we can pass the method metadata. Okay, so if you'll call your direct method from here using support.transfer, this will behave like a non-transactional method, right? So for that, we'll not directly call the support.transfer. Rather, what we'll do, get the metadata or method invocation, then give that method metadata invocation details to this guy, transaction interceptor. He will do the get transaction, he will commit and roll back based on the scenario. You no need to do that. So I can remove these things. Okay, let me comment it. Hope this is clear for you, right? Rather than proxy handle the creating transaction and commit and roll back based on the situation, let transaction interceptor does this for us. That is the reason Spring developer provided this class. Hey, you no need to take the headache. You just tell me what is your method name, what is the type of argument, what is the target class. Give me all the information. I will call that method. Then I will apply the around advice. I will apply the transaction behind the scene. Okay. So for that, to call the target method, I also need to inject my target class, which is account service. Then I need to define that as part of the constructor. Just initialize it. Fine. Once you initialize the target class, once you inject your target class, all sorted. Just go here, paste your logic for method invocation. This is something will be execute by reflection method to get the metadata of the method. Okay. So unhandled exception, just format it properly. Better I'll keep them in a try catch. Let me remove these. Okay, all good. So what we are doing here, what proxy will internally do, proxy will create the metadata of your method saying that okay, I want to apply the transaction for this transfer method, and it is having three argument of type long, long and double. Then what is the method name? This is what you are given. What is the type of argument? These are the three argument. What is the method you want to proceed? Target class transfer method with these argument. Who is the target class? Account service. Okay, and accessible object is nothing, my method, which is transfer method. Then once you build all the metadata, okay, we are giving that to the transaction interceptor. So this is the place where exactly the transaction will apply and around advice will be handled by this transaction interceptor. This is the person who is doing all the magic behind the scene. Now this is just a pseudo code we have written, and this is what the mechanism it internally does in transaction interceptor class. If you are not trust on the code snippet what we are writing here, let me show you that directly in the transaction interceptor class. This is the class given by Spring Framework transaction, and if you see here, there is a method called invoke. This is what we understand, right? Method dot invoke, and what we are giving to him, method invocation. It's all about our proxy details and method details. Now it will evaluate what is the target class where I need to apply the transaction. Once you get method invocation details or metadata ready, we are giving that to, hey, take this, this is my method, this is the target class, then proceed with the execution. If you'll go inside it, this is where it does lot many things. See the line number 346, what it does? It get the transaction attribute source. Either it will get the existing transaction or it will create a new transaction. It depends on what type of propagation you have defined. Okay, so I don't want to repeat again about the isolation and propagation. I will drop my recent video link in description. You can check them out. So remember, this is something, it will get the transaction which is nothing your before method execution, right? Then it will determine the transaction manager, which type of transaction manager is this. Is this data source transaction manager or JPA transaction manager? Different transaction manager is there. If you observe here, it's not visible properly because of the font I am using, but you can see there are so many transaction manager, right? JPA, JDBC, Hibernate, data source, different transaction manager is there. Based on your auto configuration, Spring will detect which type of transaction manager you are using in this particular code. Then you can ignore this if it is all about the reactive programming. Then once it find the transaction manager, it will evaluate the join point identification. When I'm saying join point identification, who is your target? What is the method you want to apply the around advice? That is what the method name it will identify. Okay, then this is the place the game will start. See here, this is an around advice. Invoke the next interceptor in the chain. This will normally result in a target object being invoked. Who is our target object? Account service, right? So add a breakpoint here. This is where it will call your actual method. Before that, it already create the transaction. We already observed that on line number 346. Okay, then if there is any failure, this one, if there is no failure, it will simply execute this. This is what something we understand, right? Method.invoke is nothing your target method. Before that, it will execute get transaction. After that, either it will commit or rollback based on the scenario. So here it is committing if all good. Here, if you observe, it will roll back if there is any failure. Can you see here? All good, right? Now let's start our application and we'll debug the flow. We'll validate the flow for both the scenario. We'll first go for the happy scenario, then we'll debug and understand the failure scenario as well. Okay, currently I'm not throwing any exception. This is what something we are trying the happy scenario. So let me start the application. Meanwhile, if you'll see the database, I already have the 3 account object with some amount. Okay, we'll play with these 3 user and we'll validate the flow. So it started. Clear everything. Go to the browser. Open the Swagger. Then go to your account controller. This is the method. Try it out. From user ID 1, I want to send amount to user ID 2. How much? Let's say 100. Okay. But before I trigger that, let me do one thing. First, make sure you need to start your application in a debug mode. So let me add a breakpoint here. Then add here. Here. Okay. Send the request. So where the request is landed, once you send the request to your transfer method of account service, if you see here, the invocation have all the information. And also if you see here the proxy method. First let me show you the class name. Is this the class name we are using account service? Correct? So first request will come to the interceptor. It will create the proxy class. Can you see the proxy class name? Account service, Spring CGLib, some random number, some special character. It is a dynamic proxy created by CGLib. Okay. If your account service will implement from some other classes, let's say you have defined an interface, then you have defined the implementation, then it will create the JDK dynamic proxy. Since it is a concrete class, for us, it is creating a CGLib based proxy. Then what is the target? Is nothing your account service. What is the method of your target? Can you see here? Transfer method. Then what is the argument? These are the three arguments you are giving. All the method invocation details, all the inputs or all the method signature will be captured as part of this invocation object. Now, if you want to see in a better way, let me export this thread and you can see them. Okay. The execution started from where? Your controller method, transfer method. Then what it does? It create a proxy class of CGLib. Fine. Once it create the proxy class, then the request is delegated to interceptor method. I mean, it is prepare the method invocation object by using reflection, and then it delegate to the transaction interceptor dot invoke method. And currently we are in that particular class. Okay. Now let's move in. You have this target class information about account service. Now all the details we are giving to whom? This transaction aspect support.java class. Okay, this is where the actual around advice logic will be executed. So let's go inside it. Now at very first step, what it does, it will get the transaction attribute source. When I'm saying transaction attribute source, it will fetch all your transaction specific information. What is the isolation you have defined? What is the propagation you have defined? Everything it will fetch. All the attribute of transaction it will fetch. Then in line number, what is this? 348. It will create the transaction object. Okay. It will create if not exist, depends on your propagation. If you define propagation required new, always it will create a new transaction and will give it to you. So let's move in. Next, if you see this transaction attribute, what is this? See here. That is what I was talking about, right? Whatever attribute you are specified for transaction, it will fetch everything. Propagation required, isolation read, committed. These are the isolation and propagation we have set in our other transactional annotation. Based on this, it will decide how to play with the transaction object. Okay, that is the different story. I don't want to go again on propagation and isolation. Next step, it will determine the transaction. But how it will determine which type of transaction you want? You want JDBC transaction, or you want data source transaction, or JPA transaction? This is something will be depends on Spring auto configuration feature. So I believe you are aware about it. I also uploaded a video. I uploaded it long back ago, which is too old, but the concept is not changed. You can refer to that. But still, let me show you. If you will go to the library section, if you will open Spring Boot auto configure, go inside meta-nf, Spring, go to this particular imports, you will find something called JPA auto configuration. Okay, open this particular class. Then if you observe, it import another configuration class. Go inside it. Again, this -at JPA configuration. See the condition statement here. Enable configuration on properties is this. Conditional on single candidate if you found the data source. So there are different conditions based on what Spring will enable and disable the features. Go to the JPA base configuration, and if you see here, there you will find something JPA. See here, create the bean of JPA transaction manager, which is the subclass of platform transaction manager. When you want to create this particular bean, when you will not find the bean of transaction manager. If you didn't explicitly define the bean of transaction manager, then Spring will create by default bean as a JPA transaction manager. Okay, that is what the feature of Spring auto configuration. So again, I will request you to check out my how Spring Boot internally work, that video. Try to go through it. If you don't understand, or if you feel it is too old, let me know. I'm ready to remake that specific video. Okay, fine. Let me close everything. Now let's go to the next step. Determine the transaction manager. I don't want to debug this particular method. Come out from here. Now see what transaction manager we have now. Which transaction manager we have? If you observe, it's JPA transaction manager, right? And we understand why it is JPA transaction manager. Now let's scroll down. Next step, it will find the join point where you want to apply the advice. Where account service transfer method. All good. Now it will come to the this line. This is nothing your actual method call. Before that, we create the transaction. That is what something. Before your method execution, you have executed that part of logic. Now this is what your actual method call. In actual method, the request will go to your transfer method of account service. Can you see here? Request came here. I will disable the breakpoint here. This is just I added to show you the actual method call. Okay. Now go again. It will keep repeat for all the method you will do. See, in this account service transfer method, all the database operation, even though you are fetching it from the DB, all DB call is executing within a same transaction, right? So every time this will execute. Get the target class and it will check whether I need to apply the transaction or not. Fine. So let me skip them quickly. See here. If you observe what it does, it execute your actual method. Fine. He didn't find any failure. So request didn't go to the catch block. If it will go to the catch block, then only it will roll back the things, right? So since there is no failure, request didn't go to the catch block. Where it came? It directly came to the success scenario, commit transaction after returning. Okay. It will simply commit the transaction. Now go to the console. All set. There is no failure. Okay. Now let's enable the failure scenario. So we are done this, right? Before we understand, then it execute the transfer. This part is done. Now we'll understand this part. But we need to exclude the success part. Okay. That's cool. Let's restart the application. So we restarted the application, but let's validate the DB whether the amount is reflected here or not correctly. Yeah. From 1, we send 100 to whom? This guy, right? Okay, I sent to this guy 2. So 100 minus from here and credited in this account. That is working fine. Now we started the application. clear everything, go to the Swagger and send the request again. So request came to the transaction interceptor. Then it will collect all the method invocation details. It will call the invoke within transaction. It will fetch the transaction attributes. Then it will create the transaction based on the auto configuration feature. Then it will identify who is the join point. I need to apply the advice. Once it identify, then it will go here. Okay. Now here, this is the place it will execute your actual method. Send the request. It will come again because of this line. Now it execute for this. It didn't apply the transaction, but it check behind the scene. Second time it will execute for it. Third time it will come for here. Then failure, and fourth time. Let's see how it is behaving. Just keep it. Now the request should goes to my account service, this particular method. Okay, let's see. So it came to the account service. Before that, it execute twice for this call. Now it came here. It will persist the record. There will be no failure. Okay. Now see here. First, it persists the record. There is no failure as such. Then it found okay, there is error. Now let's see how it will behave. See here. Does it came here? It execute your method. Then second time when it execute the this particular method, account repository dot save, it found okay, there is some error. Now what I need to do? While executing 2DB operation, I found there is a error. Then my simple task is to roll back everything because user is expecting to maintain consistency. Okay, so let's see what it is doing. And we are getting the, it is showing the correct error message what we are throwing from code. Receiver bank server is down. So it will simply roll back everything. Okay, this is the error. It roll back everything. And now if you will validate in your DB, I didn't refresh. Okay, the amount will be remain same because of the failure. The sender will not impact if the failure is there in the receiver end. See here, there is no change on the amount. Okay, so this is what something Spring transaction work behind the scene. So the key things you need to remember: the AOP around advice applied by this transaction interceptor, and this is the code for before execution, before your target method execution. This is the place it execute your target method. Then if there is a failure, it will roll back the transaction. If there is no failure, it will commit the transaction. This is what something the simple flow of Spring transaction, how it work internally. Okay, so just give a try, debug the flow, and try understand in better way. And do let me know in a comment section if you have any doubts or if you have any open questions. That's all about this particular video, guys. Thanks for watching this video. Meet you soon with a new concept.